And we're going to begin. I would like to welcome everybody onto SharePoint ShopTalk, our very first Shop Talk in March. We're so happy to have you guys on, and I'm looking forward to today's session. My name is James Wright. I am the SharePoint ShopTalk Community Manager, and you can always tweet to me at SPShopTalk or at Alphabas New York City. And now you can reach me directly on SharePointShopTalk.com. And we're very happy to have that site up and going. I know a lot of people are becoming a member to the site, and we're very happy because you can talk directly to panelists as well as the members, follow up on things that were talked about, and also add questions, whatever you want, all right there, and get in contact with me directly on that site as well. We're also a part of Facebook and LinkedIn, so you can find us in the group section on LinkedIn. And just for those who do not know, we also do the New York Enterprise Search User Group, and you can find information on LinkedIn as well. So those of you who are using GoToWebinar for the very first time, I just wanted to run through some of the functionality. You open and close your panel with that red arrow there. That's on your that's on the panel. So if you want to, make your dashboard large or small, you do it there. You can test your audio in the audio section, and that's on the right-hand side in that picture there. Submit text questions. If you don't feel like speaking, you can do that there. The questions I will be alerted about, and I will inform everyone of the questions. And last but certainly not least, if you want to have your questions live over the phone just by speaking up, all you have to do is click that raise hand, or if you have something that you want to say to me, raise your hand, and I will contact you, and we'll get your question answered over the phone as well. And for those of you who are on the phone, like our friend Joelle, she's actually using a phone and not an earpiece, you always have to have that pen in order to speak. So make sure you look on your dashboard for the pen, and that will allow you to speak and mute yourself and unmute yourself and so forth. Remember that no question is too big or small, no matter what you think. Just if you have a question, please feel free to ask it, and always state your name in your question. We want to give you guys some latest updates for news. Next week, we are very excited to have Jeremy Dake. For those of you who don't know him, he helps to run and actually helped to start nothing but SharePoint.com, and he's an expert in governance, and he's going to be on to talk with the panel as well as the members, and I think it'll be a great opportunity to get any questions that you might have about governance and even submitting things to nothing but SharePoint, any general questions you have about SharePoint to Jeremy. So if you have any questions, please submit them on our site. And SharePoint Saturdays are announcing that they're looking for speakers. Houston, they're going to be the last days for tomorrow, so if you want to submit something to Houston, you can do it by today or tomorrow. And also Baltimore, you can submit your request or your talks to Baltimore as of today. And just so you know, those who may not know that the SharePoint MVPs, they are off at the MVP Summit, so we welcome them back next week. So without further ado, we're going to introduce our panelists. I'm going to introduce Chris because he's going to be on in about 5 to 10 minutes. Chris Petit is a developer for Portal Solutions and SharePoint consultant, and he has very good blogs at www.celon.com and Celon, which is a shorter blog, and that basically talks about different things that have errors when you're working with SharePoint and different things that we need to fix. And you can always tweet to Chris at ChrisPotitPro, and we will welcome him back on in a few minutes. But Paul is here, and I would like Paul to introduce himself to the group.
Hi everyone, my name is Paul Olenek. I'm a senior SharePoint and enterprise search consultant for Arcovis. I am also just about a Microsoft SharePoint VTSP, and I'm an MCP, and have contributed to some different books and texts, and I have a blog which you can find if you just do an internet search with my name, Paul Olenek. And that's about it.
Well, thanks for joining us, Paul. And Paul had some exciting news because he contributed a chapter to SharePoint 2010 Enterprise Architects Guidebook, and they are getting very close to the publishing date, which I believe is in April, correct?
I think that sounds right.
Okay. Well, congratulations on that, and we'll keep an ear out on it for when it gets released. So before we begin, I just wanted to talk a little bit about our Arcovis, who helps to organize SharePoint ShopTalk and who allowed us to use GoToMeeting for our talks from now on. They're go-to-fied partners and virtual technology solution professionals specializing in SharePoint and search. And you can always reach them at info@arcovis.com and tweet to us at Arcovis New York City. So thanks a lot, Arcovis. So we're ready to begin. Without further ado, I am so excited because last week we were talking about user adoption. So this week it made a lot of sense to talk to people who are involved with user adoption firsthand. And we had a great volunteer, Joelle, and she's a power user and she's responsible for training and supporting company users on SharePoint. She also works with out-of-the-box development, such as custom lists, libraries, data view web parts, input path, and workflows. And she also has experience with SharePoint design and working on a branding project. So we invited her on to talk a little bit about her experiences and maybe help those who are challenged with similar objectives. So without further ado, I'm going to let her say hello to the group and tell her a little bit more about herself and how she even started with SharePoint.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I am on the phone, but I have my mic handy, so if anyone can't hear me, then I can gladly switch over to my mic. As Jimmy said, I am Joelle Farley. I am a SharePoint User Development Analyst for a company that's been using SharePoint for about a year now. So I've actually only worked with SharePoint just a little over a year. And I basically, as you said, I train all of our users. I support our users. I've had a lot of experience with the adoption and some of the challenges that we face as SharePoint trainers. And my background is instructional design and training. So I actually have no development, no administration in my background, and I've kind of just learned as I went over the past year. I think that's basically it.
I know. I think there's a lot of people in your shoes when they're moving into SharePoint, and I'm very happy that you're so involved and that you came on with us today. So I have a couple.
Glad to be here.
Oh, thanks. So I do have a couple of questions, and some of them are lined out with the first one being, I know that you said there's a lot of challenges when you're training. What do you feel is your biggest challenge when you're training users?
I think one of the biggest challenges that I face is that I came from training software that was kind of mandatory to the user's job. So previously I actually worked for a company that deals with physicians and medical billing and practice management. So previously I had trained on softwares like billing softwares and financial softwares and things like that, where the adoption was kind of built into the training because they were programs where the users had to learn how to use them in order to do their daily jobs. And so one of the struggles I had with SharePoint is that SharePoint was something that we were pushing out as something to kind of help our users, to help our managers deal with their clients and to help with communication and that kind of thing. But it wasn't something that we were immediately making mandatory. So I kind of had to wrap my head around that a little, and I trained a few users, and then I had to go back and go, okay, I need to think more about adoption. So I think that was probably my biggest challenge, and that was something that I definitely had to learn or figure out how to make adoption more important in my training.
Has that changed when you went back to the adoption? Has there been a more of a push now and more support in terms of getting people training, or is it still something that's in the works?
No, I mean, it definitely has been something that I have focused on a lot over the past several months, and so I kind of had to realize that it wasn't, the way we use SharePoint for our users, it's a very easy thing to learn because we don't give our users access to all of the tools that SharePoint has. We basically create a site from a template. We customize it so that it meets the needs of the processes that they do, and then we train them on how to use it. And so that part is pretty simple. With the adoption, I kind of took a step back and realized that I wanted to create some things that would show them how SharePoint could help them on a daily basis. So I actually created like day in the life exercises, I guess you would say, where I would show them, here's your day, here's what you're typically doing throughout the day, and here's how you can use SharePoint to, better communicate with your client, to get information out there so that your client can get to it without having to, email you or depend on that. So I kind of went back and did that. And something else we did is we actually started to talk to some of the users that were kind of adopted themselves, kind of got on board pretty quickly. I guess I often hear them referred to as the SharePoint evangelists.
Oh, okay.
With those type of users, I kind of started communicating with them when I would think about putting a new process on SharePoint or think about just putting something new out there. I would work very closely with them to get their input, to see what kind of things they thought I could do. It's kind of like their feedback, their suggestions, and that kind of thing. And that seemed to help because they got more bought into the product because they felt like they were more a part of the process of implementing SharePoint.
Got it. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And before I ask my next question, I wanted just to let the audience know, just in case I wasn't clear, that if you hear something that Joelle was talking about or that you want to expand upon or you have a question for her, you can always interrupt us and raise your hand, or and we'll unmute you so that you can ask your question directly to Joelle. But that was very insightful because I'm always wondering like the cool ways that people help to implement the users into using the SharePoint platform more effectively. So I think you just already gave us a couple of tips with that day in the life of SharePoint. But do you have any other favorite tips and tricks that you lend to that you can lend to the listeners in terms of user adoption or anything SharePoint?
Well, I think one of the things that I've learned is that I was on a webinar a couple of months ago, and it was actually with I think Innovative E and CloudShare, and they brought up an analogy. It was something about SharePoint is like giving a baby a toolbox. I think it was something like that. I'm probably getting it wrong, but it was a really neat analogy, and I kind of have realized that. With SharePoint, there are so many tools and so many options that you can use to, create these, electronic business processes and store your data out there and communicate. That I think what we had to do is we had to sit down and figure out exactly what things we wanted our users to do and train them on that. And then as we came up, as we decided to, for instance, like when we decided to kind of venture into the info path, to venture down that road, we would then introduce that to the users. So it's kind of like we slowly introduced them to the tools. We didn't just say, here's SharePoint, here's a book on SharePoint, have fun. We kind of slowly gave them what they needed to know, and then we just slowly introduced other things as we decide to use some of the other out-of-the-box features that are offered.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. And I know that you also said that you were part of a large branding project when you were using SharePoint Designer. What was your role in that project?
I kind of had a role in pretty much all of it. I helped come up with the design, work with what design that we wanted to use and what things we wanted in our new design. I even helped a little bit with writing the code or creating the new master page and the new CSS file. And then I took charge of rolling it out to all of our sites. So we had, I think we have a good 30 or 40 site collections, and so then we had to roll out the new design and get users trained, on what to expect with the new design. So that was kind of my role.
Yeah, because what I hear is that many people, and I could be wrong, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but many users outsource for branding. Did your company do that?
Yeah, actually, we use a third party to assist with our administration, so our normal server admin stuff. And so we actually reached out to them for a little bit of help with at least with the creating the new master page and figuring out exactly what things that we were thinking we wanted, whether they would work with SharePoint or not.
Got it. And how did you come up with the right designs that would fit your specific company's identity, and what were your main objectives for that project?
One of the things I kept hearing was, especially from our executives, was that we wanted it to be less SharePointy. So I think we wanted to, we wanted to brand it, so we actually already had a public corporate website. And so we went to that website, we looked at some of the layout of that website, the graphics and that kind of thing, and we just pretty much took from that, determined, what we really wanted to do with the SharePoint branding. We also went out and looked at some of the, some sites, some popular sites that are SharePoint sites that have been, branded for some of the larger companies, and we took from some of that as well.
Nice. Okay. We have two more questions. I know that you're talking a lot, so thank you for bearing with me and being so eager to share. When experimenting and learning SharePoint out of the box, what advice would you give a novice in getting started? As I mentioned, I've actually only worked on SharePoint for a little over a year, and before that I have no development experience or anything like that. So I think one of the things that I quickly realized was that the community for SharePoint is extremely helpful. So I just started looking for blogs. I went on Twitter and started following different SharePoint experts on Twitter. The SharePoint Saturday is something, if you live around a city or close to a city that has a SharePoint Saturday, that's extremely beneficial, or even if they have a user group. I live in Atlanta, so we do have a SharePoint user group and a SharePoint Saturday, usually. So those have both been extremely helpful for me. And just kind of, going on blogs, reading things, finding books that are specific to the that I'm trying to learn to do. Another thing would just be to, or better, a development environment. So then that, if you do find something, like if there's some kind of a custom list or custom, or even a web card or something like that you want to try to learn how to use and make it work for whatever you're trying to do in SharePoint, it's great to be able to play around and test things out. Mm-hmm. What did you use for your
business side? Oh.
No, I'm sorry. Go on.
From the business side, I just say that you definitely want to work with your users. If you are trying to put processes into SharePoint or make things in SharePoint that you've normally done manually, it's really good to work with your users and get their input on things, because that's really helped me a lot, because there's a lot of things that they do that I don't have any knowledge of.
Got it. Wow. That's really helpful. And yeah, I wonder, I think there's a SharePoint Saturday list, so if you're wondering if you have a SharePoint Saturday in your area, you can just Google or Bing SharePoint Saturday, and there's a list, I think a full list of all the locations that they're in currently, and I feel like it's expanding all the time, so thanks for that. My last question for you is, when you're developing custom lists, that'll be web parts, how much thought goes into the process and the week before the actual implementation? I think you kind of answered that a little bit by talking to your users, but is there anything else that you kind of do before you implement these new things?
Yeah, I think it depends on really what I'm trying to do. If it's something as simple as just, columns and creating some stuff in a list or library, usually there's less planning and more testing with that. But for things like InfoPath, which is actually something, first, one thing I would recommend is Laura Roger, I know who's a regular panelist on here. If you are looking to get into InfoPath or are brand new to it, I bought her book, Using InfoPath 2010 with SharePoint 2010, a couple months ago when it came out, and that has saved my life. I've actually been able to build several processes in InfoPath that are working really, really well. So I just wanted to point that out. But with it, I think that's one that you definitely, that's something that you want to take some time and plan. Plan out your form, plan out what features you want in your form, and test it with the users like I mentioned earlier. That's a big thing, is just to get some of those evangelists or those key users to get their input and have them test out things before you actually deploy it.
Cool. Thank you so much. And before you go, I'm going to bother you one last thing, because 2 weeks ago we introduced Share Plus, the Share Plus app. And basically, this is an app that you can use SharePoint on your iPhone, your iPads, and your Droid phones. And Joelle, she volunteered to download it and test it out. And I kind of wanted just to get your review of the product before you leave.
Oh, sure. I actually just downloaded the free version just to kind of see how it worked. I noticed that it was it's a lot like the kind of default mobile view that SharePoint 2010 comes with. I'm not sure if all the users are familiar with that, what that looks like, but the free version is very similar to that. And I did notice it was a little buggy. For instance, when I connected to the site and then I would go to click on something, like say a list or library, or a link in the site, it would say that it can't connect, and then I'd immediately click on it, tap on it again, and then it would connect. So I thought that was a little strange. It was doing that on everything I tried to click on. So I don't think maybe the free version not so worth it. But I did notice that with the paid version, there are some really cool features, like you can record videos on your phone and post them, and I thought that was pretty neat. There was a couple other things, I think, on their website, which you may have shared last week or the week before, but on their website it goes into some of the details of what the paid version has, and so that might be worth it for someone who's really looking for something outside of the default mobile view.
Cool. Well, like I said, thank you so much, Joel. You are truly what I believe SharePoint success means, which is trying new things, volunteering to share information, and also educating users. So I wanted to thank you so much for your time and for your knowledge share. And yeah, for those of you who don't know, we're sending a Pluralsight subscription to Joelle for her time, and we really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, that was a lot. Thank you. Oh, and I'm also entering the Share Plus app into the text field so that everybody can see it. I think I did it twice by accident. But yeah, so just to follow behind Joelle's talk and her knowledge share, we do have 3 more subscriptions to anyone who would like to share like Joelle did. And you can share anything like personal SharePoint accomplishments, SharePoint struggles, demonstrate how you're currently using SharePoint, your favorite SharePoint tips and tricks, such as the topic, or become an interviewee just like Joelle was. And also, just letting you know, the first member to submit a question for Jeremy for next week will receive a 1-month free subscription to Pluralsight as well. So thanks a lot once again, and we wanted to welcome Chris, who is actually here now, and he's also, just, Chris, can you say hello? I want to make sure that your mic is working and everything. Oh, I think, Chris, you don't have a pen. I'm going to send you a pen, okay, Chris? Audio pen sent. So you just use that pen and then you should be able to talk. Well, while Chris is getting his audio together, I wanted to keep moving. I actually, oh, there you go, Chris. All right, so I'm going to unmute you. Let me do that real quick. Chris?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, definitely. You sound great.
Great, good. You want me to introduce myself, or?
Yeah, Yeah, sure, why not? I kind of gave a brief overview about you, but it's nice coming from you.
Okay. I'm sure she mentioned that I work for Portal Solutions as a UX and BA consultant doing SharePoint solutions. That's pretty much it.
Well, thanks for joining us, Chris. And so the next segment that we're going to have right now is actually I frequent the Nothing But SharePoint site, and just to see, what new blogs are there. I don't know if any of you know about it, but it's pretty popular. So they have all sorts of articles from different angles. And I came across this article that James, I only have a Twitter name up there, but his name is James Love. Yes, James Love wrote. And to me, this article was excellent because it has so many links to different things that a developer would need. So even if without his great writing style and own experiences that's within it, I think it's a very worthwhile article to have. So I put that article in the chat, and I'm going to resend it just in case you didn't get to see it. So basically, this is telling users or developers who are just moving into the SharePoint side. They may have been developing for their lives, but they have no idea what the SharePoint space is like. And it basically gives an overview on where to go and what steps you should take when you're doing this. And so one of the consistent problems that I hear about developers is that they reinvent the wheel. So I'm going to direct these questions to Chris and Paul, who have a lot of experience in development. And James alludes to this in his article, and I'm wondering how deep must a developer learn about SharePoint before trying to build custom solutions?
I'll let Paul go first.
So how much, I think that I think a new .NET developer that's using SharePoint cannot just go and start building production solutions for the very reason that you sort of brought up, is that they don't know what all the features of SharePoint are out of the box, and like you said, they may be sort of reinventing the wheel and introducing code that doesn't need to be introduced. It's a level of risk and obviously effort that you don't want to expend. So I would say if they're not already up to speed to SharePoint, they at least need to have an advisor who can tell them. So as an example, I have a really good buddy who's an amazing .NET programmer, and I've been using him on SharePoint projects recently. I feel very confident in using him, even though he's not a SharePoint person, because I know the product very well, and I'm giving him guidance. And then I just turn over the actual coding to him, and it actually works out very nicely. But just throwing him into a client and having him choose what to code and when could be potentially disastrous, I think.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. That's very smart, actually, because to team up like that, that's something that wasn't mentioned in the article, but that's probably like a go-to idea when you're first beginning SharePoint. Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything, I think.
Yeah, so Jimmy's article is largely related to really the real development side of which I don't dance on. So I do more, if I do anything, I'm doing UI work. So, but I think Paul is right. I've seen on my side, very proficient designers come in, but I as well wouldn't just drop them on projects. I mean, I think if anything, I would rather have someone who is very talented technically outside of SharePoint and bring them in instead of someone who kind of fumbles around a little bit on the design side but knows some of the more architecture of SharePoint. So, but it all depends. We have a very wide degree. Carlos, who sometimes comes on here, can write C# and then turn around and do a master page. So there's just a very wide degree of talents, and just depends on who you're dealing with and who you want to bring into your company. Our company we're smaller, so we want to raise up junior people, But also sometimes being a small company, sometimes they can't keep up, and so it's kind of the risk of having those people. So I think it depends a lot on your corporate culture and how you want to develop people.
I would just, I think something else that occurred to me when I looked at that article, and it was very well written, and I liked one of the things he said in the beginning about trying to get your hands around what is the scope of this product, right? It's an enormous platform now, and it gets bigger with each release, and I think that if I'm a new developer getting into SharePoint, I would probably start from two extremes. One of them is just, again, getting a sense of what is this thing, what is the scope of the product, what are all the moving parts, what is a service application, what is a list, all the, you know what I mean? And then I would actually go to the other extreme and just try to do a sample project, right? Like look online and see what are some things that somebody might do some custom code with, and you know, write an event handler in C# or try to connect to SharePoint from an external application using the new client-side APIs or something, because there's nothing, in terms of the sort of nitty-gritty details, nothing's going to beat actually touching it and looking at the object model. But this way you can kind of approach it from both ends, make sure you understand the product, and also get that those initial experiences with actually writing code against it.
Seems like a lot to take in when you're first starting.
Yeah, there's a good Paul Galvin, who's a SharePoint MVP, has a good. I think he also wrote a blog, but I saw it as a session at a SharePoint Saturday once about the path to SharePoint mastery, and it was a kind of a similar topic, and I thought it was very good and very well thought out. Just sort of like, here are all the things you need to hit. These are the things you need to learn. This is the way you learn it. This is how you engage with the community. This is, you know what I mean? He just sort of lays it all out. I thought it would be very helpful for somebody who's on that path, I think.
Cool, yeah. Whenever you get a chance, send that to me, and I'll add it to the website.
Sure.
I don't know. You know, some of these questions that I'm asking, I'm not even certain that you'll have an answer to. But the part that I was reading about was publishing framework and how it works with SharePoint Server 2010. That was a little bit confusing to me. I don't really know even the beginning parts of that. I was wondering if you can kind of give an overview of that and I guess variations.
You want to know what the publishing framework is?
Yeah, like he said that it's very important for a developer to understand that, and as well as variations. So I was wondering, you know, if you could kind of expand on that.
Right. I don't know, Chris, would you like to speak to that, or do you want me to?
Do you want to know publishing framework more out of the box or more technical? Because if so, Paul's technically going to be able to explain much better than me.
Let's start with out of the box. Why don't you give an out of the box explanation?
Okay. So publishing, I think of SharePoint publishing in two contexts. The first is publishing of document management, which include records and all the kind of publishing features, and tied up with that is a lot of version control that I think SharePoint provides, obviously very, very well. Second, the more commonly thought of as far as the publishing approach is probably the web content management feature set in SharePoint that facilitates more of the free text as opposed to just documents, and a lot of times together. So SharePoint provides a lot of templates and functionality to cater to both of those. But obviously, if you're only going to get the publishing WCM part of it with Server, so you can't get it with Foundation. So if that's a requirement, you're going to need that. But yeah, so SharePoint 2010 in particular has expanded it a lot in terms of what you can do with the UI, how you can control publishing. Obviously, the ribbon has made a foundational difference to that. And it has facilitated a lot of both internal and external publishing in a lot of new and exciting ways. So I think the first thing you have to do is you have to familiarize yourself with how SharePoint approaches it from an end-user perspective before you start developing solutions and start pushing these on users. But obviously, for the vast majority, I would say, of well, the projects that I do in SharePoint, 95% of them involve a web content management publishing, whether it's intranet or public site. They're very, very heavily customized, the UI, and they have a lot of customizations technically to facilitate web content management publishing, in addition to all the document management kind of stuff that we do. So basically, I've never done a project on Foundation in my professional life. So those would be the two components I think you have to start on, and then I'm sure Paul can talk more about the technical extensibility of the publishing framework.
Right. Those are good synopsis, and it's funny you say that you've never done one in Foundation. I think I've done one or two, and every time I do it, I don't remember off the top of my head what you can and can't do and which features aren't provided, and I just have all these moments where I'm like, oh man, I thought I could do this, and I have to do something custom. But I think that, especially in the context of this article, what would be important maybe for a developer is, I mean, any developer would know that there are always many, many approaches to accomplish the same thing. And with SharePoint, what I find personally is that it's often that you have an option of how to scope your solution. So maybe if I give an example, like let's say somebody wants to put like a feedback widget on their pages. So like a little button that you click and it pops up a form, and then you type something there and it sends an email to the administrator like, hey, this page doesn't render properly for me, or something like that. So there are a lot of questions about, there would be a lot of ways to accomplish that, right? And let's just say we do it sort of client-side, so it's JavaScript and HTML and stuff like that. Still a whole bunch of questions about what is this thing scoped to? Is it scoped to a site collection? Is it scoped to a page? Is it scoped to a site, and all that stuff? And all of those things will speak to where you want this code to actually reside, and how you want it to be scoped. And so I think the publishing framework, it's important to understand page layouts, master pages, and versioning and all those things, because where that code, you could have it, for instance, you could have that code reside in a master page. The code could reside in a page layout. It could reside in a web part on the page, or some combination of those, or, there are other ways that you could do it as well. But understanding the publishing framework, especially in that sense, page layouts, master pages, and content, will really help you make those decisions, because you can really paint yourself into a corner if you don't sort of choose the right one. I thought it was a little rambling, but I think you kind of get what I mean.
I do. And I understand how you can paint yourself in the corner. And also, that is very, I think the out of the box, as well as a little bit more deep knowledge about it, is very helpful, because I think that when you, I've always was trying to learn SharePoint, and I remember Harry telling me there's so much that goes into it. You really have to have an understanding of the scope, and you can make a mistake, and it can be detrimental to the site. So I think once you have that kind of understanding, you'll act more cautiously when you're creating. I guess that's the sum up that I have. The other thing in his article was, and this was kind of funny to me, because his warnings about Visual Studio, they scared me, and I've never worked with it. But he says that it can be very expensive once you start going the Visual Studio option, and then also you can make a lot of mistakes once again. So I'm wondering, how do you make the decision to start using Visual Studio, and how do you validate that within the project?
I'm trying to pull up this part of the article because I don't remember it that well, but I think he's not saying Visual Studio versus some other tools. He's just, when he says Visual Studio, he means he's basically equating that to writing managed code. Mm-hmm. And the question is, how do you make the decision to write managed code versus try to do something client-side or something out of the box or something with SharePoint Designer. And it's interesting, I think, Chris, it was you who gave you had a blog post that kept getting updated about your opinion on something in the last Shop Talk, and this is a subject where I find my my opinion shifting a little bit over the years. And so I used to be of the mind that, I would never write any managed code unless sort of absolutely necessary, right? So unless I've explored other options, because it there's a level of risk, introducing code to your farm. There's a lot of testing and effort that's involved, and planning that's involved with creating those types of solutions. And then as you continue to upgrade over the years, as new versions come out, it's something that you may have to refactor over and over again. And for those reasons, and because I think a lot of people don't sort of get everything they can out of the box stuff, I always leaned more towards the other. But a few times in the last couple of years, I found myself kind of voting for the out-of-the-box solution where I saw, SharePoint almost gets us there, and I think of that if I just do this in the UI and tweak this one little thing and hope, do this to the browser that it'll work, and I end up, I think, probably getting in danger of maybe spending more time and kind of getting myself into trouble. So I'm starting to shift more and looking very closely at all my options at the very beginning. If I think that we can just get a quicker win and have more flexibility with managed code right from the beginning, again, using Visual Studio, I'm definitely a lot more open to that right from the get-go. And then the other thing is with the advent of sandbox solutions, where there are a few more safety mechanisms built in so that the risk is a little bit lower if you can leverage a sandbox solution.
Thanks for clarifying my question. I appreciate that, and thanks for answering that. I think that's very, very helpful. And like you referenced, Chris, I believe that happens with a lot of bloggers and people just using SharePoint in general, that their mindset begins to change, that they have a little bit more experience.
Yeah, I think it's easy to make very quick, absolute opinions on things when you become convicted on something. Not just in SharePoint, but in life, right? So as we grow and learn how to use things, especially in different contexts with different people, we just naturally change and mature. So I would hope that I would not be the same type of consultant I was 3 years ago that I am today. So that happens. Paul's example of managed code was similar to he mentioned my view on folders. Yeah, it keeps changing and always for the better. So if it didn't, I would quit. So.
And just have, hold on, let's see. I just have 2 more questions for Paul and Chris. I'm going to skip, actually, and go down to the sandbox solutions one, just because Paul just mentioned it. So do you have any guidelines when using sandbox solutions? And I don't think we can get into the SharePoint object model. That's probably huge. I don't know if you want to talk about it a little bit, but just how about the sandbox solutions for now?
Right. So, I mean, if you're talking about guidelines on when to use it or when not to use it, I can't really think of any reason not to use it when you can.
Oh.
And so there are some technical limitations that a sandbox solution provides. So to give a couple of examples, if you're going to be when you deploy your solution or your feature, if it's going to put anything on the file system, that cannot be a sandbox solution. There are certain things that you can't do in the object model, meaning you can't write code to make changes or call to certain things. That would, again, prevent you from using a sandbox solution. But when you can, I think it's a great idea because that code ends up running sort of in its own a memory pool, for lack of a better word. And so if something does go wrong with it and it eats up too many resources, it will get shut down gracefully instead of sort of bringing down your whole farm as you used to be able to do. So it's a very nice safety mechanism that SharePoint 2010 has provided. I don't see any reason not to take advantage of it. The other times that I find myself really trying to use it is if I'm a consultant on a project working with a business group in a very large organization that has very strict governance on their SharePoint farms. And maybe it's very difficult to get time with those admins, and it really can slow your project down, right? So if you have to rely on the SharePoint admin and book time with them and get them create the documentation exactly as they want to see it, and then have them bring it, take it through the whole SDLC process, whatever they have there, that can be painful and sometimes feel like more than is necessary. So sometimes I'll find myself figuring out ways to create my solution in a sandbox solution just so we don't even have to bother them. Let's just do it ourselves as site collection administrators.
Well, thanks. That's really clear. I never thought about it in that way.
Paul, isn't it true that unless you have like Microsoft hosting all of your Office 365 servers and you pay a ton of money for your own servers there, that in Office 365 that's the only thing you can use as Sandbox?
I believe that is true, but I'd want to double check before. I haven't worked that much with 365 yet.
Yep, neither have I. So, yep.
Maybe we could ask John when he comes back about that. I think he has like a lot of experience using Office 365. So my last question, and I don't tell me if this makes sense, but I know that he was saying that in ASP.NET, they get new features or they have updates a lot faster than SharePoint. And so as of like right now, there's ASP.NET 4.0 that's available, but it won't work with SharePoint 2010. You have to use ASP.NET 3.5. So I'm wondering if at all, does it make sense to look at the future in ASP.NET when you're planning and when you're developing, or just does it make sense to kind of just sit in 3.5 and not look at that as making you wish for things that you don't have?
I would say, I mean, there are, it's kind of a complex question, but I would say that in general, if you are a .NET developer, you're going to be looking at what the next versions of .NET are, whether or not SharePoint is built on them or not. It's just, you're just not keeping up to date if you're not doing that. And there are cases as well where you could be coding against SharePoint, right? And maybe you have an external application that you wrote in the newer version of .NET that may be touching SharePoint, but your main code base is in is separate from SharePoint, and so you can utilize some of the new things that you get with the newer version of .NET. So I would say you're always going to kind of keep your eye on that, and most developers are geeks and will eagerly await these things to get released and download them immediately and try them out.
Got it. All right. So any last bit of advice for the developers out there before we open up for live questions? Okay. Well, I really thank you for going through that article with me. I'm not a developer, so a lot of things, some things flew over my head, but I really thought that it was something that SharePoint ShopTalk could use, and it could be a reference point in the future when we have the YouTube video up, and people can always listen back to you guys and kind of get a handle of where to start. So thanks a lot. So we are coming towards the end of SharePoint ShopTalk, and we want to open up live questions for anybody over the phone. Talk about what you're doing and share with us, and have our panelists and audience answer back. So if you have a question or want to share, please raise your hand or place it in the chat box or the question box.
this is Paul. I actually have a question that maybe Chris could. Oh, yes, Chris is still on, right?
Yep.
Yep. Do you have a lot of experience using delegate controls? Those controls that reside in the master page that you can. I've just started using them to put in to add CSS and like JavaScript references and stuff like that in the master page, and I had a question about them if you are familiar with them.
I am familiar with them. We've overwritten some of the out-of-the-box ones and written some of our own. But my question to you is, why do you have to use a delegate control to add those references?
Just mostly as a convenience and sort of to keep the deployment clean. So if I, let's say, if I want to have a different look and feel for a particular site collection, and create CSS and maybe some script and stuff like that, and I can edit the master, or I could edit the master page and just stick it in there directly. I could add it using the alternate CSS configuration and under the site settings, or I could dynamically when the page load or something like that. But this kind of seemed like the most shrink-wrapped, kind of like friendliest way to do it, right? To wrap it up in my solution. So I've been experimenting with doing that, and one of the, and I don't know, maybe we can start there. And does that sound reasonable, or?
Yeah, I guess I've never done that with delegate controls, but it seems like a reasonable way to do it. The other way I could think that I would probably be inclined to do it, is create different page layouts that override content placeholders in the master page for different site collections. But the delegate control sounds like an interesting use of it. I just haven't done that before.
There's one called additional page header.
Right.
And using it for that. But I guess what I wasn't positive about is when you do that, you end up, in your solution, you end up creating a user control. So there's an ASCX, and when you create a solution to deploy that, does something have to go into the GAC? Because when I've created these solutions, they end up being a GAC deployment type of deployment. And I wondered, is that just a setting in my Visual Studio that doesn't need to be on, or does it actually indeed require that?
I wish I could answer it. I don't know for sure. I can't imagine you would need to deploy anything to the GAC for it, unless something else in your solution has a dependency on it. I mean, you're just deploying it to the file system, right? Are you putting it in the control templates folder on the Hive?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah,
So that may
I wish I could answer it. I'm not quite sure.
A switch, and I could make it a not deploy to the GAC, and I hadn't messed with it yet enough. But I had an admin question me on it, like when I gave him the deployment package. He said, "Does this really need that?" And I thought, it probably doesn't.
Yeah. No, I don't. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Paul. And we still have about 5 minutes, so if there is a question, yes? If there's a question, you can ask it. Is that your background, Paul? I'm just wondering if someone's trying to ask a question. Alright, so I don't see any hands raised, and I don't see any questions on the dashboard. So I would love to thank everybody for joining us. I thought this was a nice conversation today, and very smooth on GoToWebinar. So we will send a follow-up email with all the links from today's discussion, and that'll also be updated on the SharePoint ShopTalk.com. And as always, if you have any questions, please submit them, and we'll include them onto ShopTalk. So I want to thank you all for joining us. A special thanks to Joelle and Chris and Paul, and to our audience. I really appreciate you for staying on and for participating today. Have a good weekend. Thanks.